following program sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.
About money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth, and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
And it's Friday, and we're going to be talking about money. You know, the market has started off this year. It's the worst start to a year in history. The Dow is down more, the Standard & Poor's is down more, NASDAQ is down more than it has happened any time in history. And that has a lot of people worried. A lot of people thinking, what's going to happen? You know, there's a lot of memories of 2008. And that is program. You also want to hear what my guest has to say. So, but to begin the whole thing, I want to take you back to 1878 because it has some application. Are you hearing me? So, 1878, there was a young man by the name of George Eastman. He was 24 years old. He was a clerk at Rochester Savings Bank, and he wanted to take a vacation. He decided he was going to go to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. But he wanted to record the trip. He wanted to record the memory of making that trip. And so he wanted to get a camera. But the cameras in those days were huge. They required a big tripod. They required a jug of water and heavy plates, heavy plate holders, gas tanks and chemicals, and a large tent to develop the photos you made. It was a wet process. And that's... Oops. I lost my place. Did I? Yeah. Anyway, he never did go on the trip. With all that to do, he never made the trip. He wanted a more portable solution. So he started to work in his kitchen. And it took him 2 years, actually. It took him 2 years to come up with a machine and a formula to do a dry plate. And out of that, he formed a company. He called it the Eastman Dry Plate Company. And as he went forward, he decided that he needed something beyond a dry plate. And a few years later, in 1884, he came up with an idea for a roll of film. And then, since he had a roll of film, he began to think about this big, huge camera. And now he had a way to make smaller film, and he could make a smaller camera. And he could roll the film up, he could roll it through the camera, and he developed a button you could push. And we all know the rest. He made the camera. And he changed the name to the Eastman Company. But he wanted a catchier name. Eastman Company didn't sound very catchy. And one of his favorite letters was the letter K. Out of all the alphabet, one of his favorite letters was K. And so he came up with the idea of adding Kodak to his name. There was no Mr. Kodak, no Mrs. Kodak, no Kodak, a little brother, no Kodak, a little sister. It was just something that he thought would be a catchier name to call his company the Eastman Kodak Company. And in his view, in 1892, his view was that he was a chemical supply and dry goods purveyor. He was a chemical goods and supplier as a general store. But he soon realized, as he got started, that he could make photography an everyday affair. And he decided that he wanted to make it as common as a pencil. You know, and for the next 100 years, Eastman Kodak would do that. From the 1890s until the 1990s, the Eastman Kodak Company produced cameras and film. Now I want you to to flip forward almost 80 years more to the year 1973, and you now have a very large company, the Eastman Kodak company. Most of the people were based in Rochester, New York. That's where George Eastman began. By now, he was gone from the scene, but there was a young engineer graduate from Rensselaer Polytech Institute, and he took an engineering job with Kodak. And that young engineer, his boss asked him to do a small favor, a small request. He'd heard about Fairchild Semiconductor inventing a small device, a charge-coupled device is what they called it. And he asked him if there was an easy way to make an electronic charge around a transistor using this device, because transistors in those days were very new. It was a very big possibility. But he wanted to see if those devices could be used for imaging. And the young engineer's name, Sasson, used those CCDs to make the first digital still camera and the first digital recording device. Now, in the 1970s, you had Polaroid that had crossed with their Speak and Spell. But it was that camera was the size of a toaster. It weighed 8.5 pounds. It had less than 1 megapixel, and it would take 30 black and white digital images. Was a pretty rough machine. Was heavy, it was clumsy, it was big, and it was really crude. And those pictures had to be stored on a cassette tape, on an external device. But you know what? 1970s, that was 1973, 1974, that was the first digital camera. So forward again, 20 years later, in 1996, Kodak has 140,000 employees, a $28 billion market cap, and they had effectively a monopoly in the film market. They had 90% of all film sold in the world and 85% of all cameras sold in the world. Think about that. That's a significant monopoly. 90% of all the film and 85% of all the cameras. And they viewed their business, the management of that company viewed their business as a photographic business. They didn't ever think that it was a business to record our lives, to capture the moment, to record the key events and times, those same things that George Eastman set out to do back in the 1890s, 1880s. Those things of recording his trip to Santo Domingo, which he never made, but that was the concept that he went with, is to record those special moments, those special places, those special memories. But the Kodak company by this time had emerged, and they didn't see themselves in that kind of a business. They saw themselves in the photographic business. That was a very profitable business. They had essentially a pricing monopoly on what they were doing. They could price their cameras how they wanted. They could price their film how they wanted. And the digital camera by this time had evolved to the point that it was expensive, but the margins were really, really tight. And they didn't envision in the 1970s how a 0.01 megapixel image camera could grow exponentially to provide huge resolution images. So they ignored it. And instead of using their dominating market presence to corner the digital market, they let the market corner them. Kodak lasted over 100 years. But you know the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. You know the rest of the story. They filed for bankruptcy. They laid off a good portion of those 140,000 people that worked for them. And a good portion of those people that worked for them, and many who had their entire lifetime savings invested in Kodak, saw that all go up in smoke. That's a story about Kodak. But we're seeing that with other companies as well. And we're seeing that happen more rapidly today. That was a 100-year story. But, Professor Richard Foster from Yale says that in the 1920s, the average lifespan of a company that was in the Standard & Poor's was 67 years in the 1920s. Today, that average is down to 15 years. Babson School of Business out of Boston says that by 2025, 40% of today's top companies will no longer exist. Their earnings will be down, their markets will be gone, and by 2025, that's not that far away, 10 years from now, 3/4 of the companies in the Standard & Poor's, 3/4 of the companies that'll be in the Standard & Poor's 500 are companies that don't exist today. Think about that. 75% of the companies that will make up the 500 largest companies in the country don't exist today. You know, that time, Kodak lasted 100 years, but those companies from the 1920s lasted an average of 67 years. Now those companies are averaging 15 years, and it's going to be even a shorter time. There's a reason that it makes sense to be on top of things. You know that I'm a long-term investor, but that long-term is becoming shorter and shorter. It's not a month, it's not a week, it's not a year, but there's a reason to evaluate what's going on. There's a reason to make sense and to be on top and ahead of the curve rather than behind the curve. Because if you're behind the curve, you're going to be like one of those employees of Eastman Kodak. So we're coming up to a commercial break. I want to talk more about this when we get back, and you want to hear my guest? Don't go away. Don't touch the dial. Stay with us because we've got a lot of things to cover.
About Money with Mike Adams will resume in a moment on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Lots of people manage investment portfolios. Just a few can manage a successful portfolio and provide exceedingly great service to their clients. Here's Mike Adams from Adams Financial Concepts.
We believe the price you pay should be based on the performance of your portfolio and the quality of service you receive.
You know, Mike, it seems that a lot of companies subscribe to the one-size-fits-all mentality of investing. Does one size really fit all?
Not with us. Every portfolio that we manage is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. We place our clients' interests first in all portfolio decisions.
If you're looking for a home for your 7-figure plus investment portfolio, call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts, specializing in creating and maintaining wealth for over 20 years. 206-903-1019. That's 206-903-1019. Or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Now we return to About Money. There's more information waiting for you at adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here again is your host, Mike Adams.
So welcome back. I've been talking about the Eastman Kodak Company, and we want to take it into the current time, and we're going to do that. But first I want to tell you a little story. So I belong to Rotary, and we had a speaker on Wednesday, and after the Wednesday meeting, on Thursdays we get together for kind of an informal chat about the program, informal meeting. And I happened to bring up the subject because I can't even remember what the lead-in, but there was some sort of lead-in, and I thought about our guest today and his company. And the name of the company is Digital Kitchen. And one of the people at the table said, "Oh, I have some friends. They're culinary experts. I got to get them to listen to the program." And I said, no. It's not about a kitchen. It's not about cuisine. It's not about food. It's about something completely different. And you, my listeners, are going to be let in on what a digital kitchen company is. My guest today is the CEO of Digital Kitchen, Bill Fritsch. Welcome to the program, Bill.
Well, thank you, Mike.
Before we get to Digital Kitchen, let's talk about your background. So why don't you fill us in on your background?
Okay, well, I'll start today, one of the more creative companies, perhaps, in the world in some ways. But I didn't start that way. I started out actually being an auditor for Ernst & Ernst by coincidence in 1973 when Kodak was inventing the digital camera. And I realized one day as I was sitting in a building doing an audit and the building shook and it was shaking. This is Akron, Ohio. And it was shaking because people in the accounting department, there were 1,200 people because we didn't have computers, and they were racing for the exit. It was quitting time. And I just realized, whoa, this is not exactly what I want to do for a living. I really want a different kind of pursuit. So I decided I would like to become a creative guy. And I thought, well, who is creative? Walt Disney. They're out in California. So I took my new wife. We sold everything we had, and we went out to California and said, here I am. So in 1976, I went to work for Walt Disney at the studio in Burbank. And I had a several-year period where I worked in some of Disney's most innovative things of the 1970s and early 1980s. Launch of the Disney Channel, launching Disney's home video business, and things at the time were like, whoa, this is really way out there.
And they were.
They were, and I could tell 100 stories about things that lead to right now and what's happening. But my wife and I had an agreement that when we had children, we would not live in Los Angeles. We wanted to be a traditional family, so our daughter Amy came along, and so we moved to Seattle, and I went to work for a little ad agency in 1982. The agency was called Sharp Hartwig Advertising, and learned everything about very small enterprise. It was really strange coming from a big corporation to that, and over a period of a few years learned everything about that business. Left there, started my own firm, grew it to a fairly large firm. Ended up along the way merging Sharp Hartwig in because we'd stayed friends after I left. Sold it to a company called True North. Went into the dot-com business. Took one of our dot-com companies here public just in advance of the dot-bomb phase. So I learned about taking companies public, and I learned about taking apart companies.
Yes.
But we successfully charted our way through it, and ultimately it sold, and the investors made some money. Then I went back into the agency business, began consulting, and a few years ago, dialing back to my Sharp Hartwig days, I rekindled a friendship with a fellow named Paul Matthias, who is the founder of Digital Kitchen. And Paul had achieved quite a bit of fame through the things Digital Kitchen, or we call it DK, had done. But he was having some business challenges, and he thought perhaps he needed somebody with both a media mind, which comes from my Disney days, and a business mind, which came from running enterprises. And I joined the board of directors 3 years ago, and then immediately after that became the CEO.
So now let's talk about Digital Kitchen, because it's not cuisine, it's not food, it's...
No, it's a very funny
advertised.
story because I hear this all the time. The other thing is in Chicago, where one of our offices is, there's a company called Design Kitchen. Well, we do really famous work that brings a lot of companies to us to create things. And Design Kitchen, they keep growing because people call them instead. I kid about that. But no, it's not about kitchens. Digital Kitchen, the name actually came from Paul Matthias. He had an ad agency. With the desktop publishing revolution, he had decided he'd rather do digital things. And so he started in the kitchen of his ad agency. And his premise was actually ad agencies are great at coming up with ideas, but they don't actually make anything. And he saw with this coming digital revolution the ability to take and to shape pixels and digits and not just create things that are promotional, but create things that are actually really deeply, deeply meaningful to people, so that even though we're looking at screens, there's something that happens that is really deep and powerful emotionally. And so fast forward on it, actually probably a number of people here know about us,
And if they don't know about you, they know some of the things that you've done.
Yes. Well, we've kind of gone from mass murder to mass markets, is the way of saying it. We created, Paul, several years back, got a relationship with Alan Ball, the producer of 6 Feet Under, and then True Blood, and convinced Alan that for HBO, he should be creating some kind of a motif at the beginning of television programs that create a mystique around a show. So the first show they did was 6 Feet Under, for which Digital Kitchen won an Emmy Award. And the opening sequence of 6 Feet Under actually was entirely different than what happened in Hollywood. And it leads to directly what we do today. Before that time, freeze frame starring James Garner, you know.
Yeah.
And instead, the idea of this was create something deeply meaningful and emotional that may not have anything to do with actually what's in the show in terms of show content. But through that, broaden your audience and the appeal and the mystique. So he brought branding to Hollywood.
And we see that in a lot of TV shows. And
Well, we created that industry.
you created,
Yeah.
because now a lot of TV shows, before they start the program, will have this little sequence. It's almost like a trailer for a movie.
And many of the people who do it nowadays actually came from Digital Kitchen. But it went from 6 Feet Under to True Blood, which won an Emmy Award for as well, to Dexter, Nip Tuck, House, and just Sex and the City. So it just really became a huge business for Digital Kitchen. And through that, the company achieved a lot of fame. And it really brought a lot of opportunity. But the other thing it did, in my judgment, is it brought to us, we started out as, we're thinking we're marketing people, but here we're designing show content for hit series. And we do think of it as marketing, but we had to develop a craft around animation and music and moving pixels around and creating things that didn't just say, here it is, which is where a lot of digital communications are, but rather when we see it, we actually feel something deep inside us. Mm-hmm. And we actually believe, and I believe, and certainly this has been my whole career, especially coming from Disney, that if you really want to be the best in marketing, have the best possible product on earth and make sure at every interaction with that product, including the product itself, that is meaningful to our hearts. Great example of that is Apple Computer, for example. And they're valued so highly because we believe in them and we want to be part of who they are. Mm-hmm. That's meaningful engagement, right? And so that's kind of what we do. And now it's morphed, if I might share just a dash more on that. At some point, there were so many people who thought, oh, this is really cool. And early on, the equipment it took to make this was prohibitively expensive, so companies had to come to us to do this kind of work. But over time, kids with digital cameras can shoot high-quality television content, and of course, the price in doing that just dropped, and it was hard to make that a business model. So the company began doing. It became the go-to resource in the advertising industry to create special effects for television commercials. So if you think about a Budweiser commercial, for example, when foam comes blasting out of a beer, and it's in the form of a crown, that was Digital Kitchen. So many of the most famous TV commercials of the last 15 years, DK had a hand in. Now today, what we've done is we've gone to brands and we said, well, if we can take branding to entertainment, why don't we bring entertainment to branding? So we brought these digital magicians to corporations and we're creating corporate mystique. So we're helping companies create things that are so deeply meaningful that people care. And that is not something you just do, it's a craft that you have to perfect.
And it has real meaning for the people that are watching it.
Oh, deep meaning. We did a video a couple of years ago for the Gates Foundation. My daughter works for the Gates Foundation in their PR department, and Amy was sharing. It was for a large corporate employee event, and Amy was sharing that people literally were drying their tears. Now that's what we want, isn't it?
Yeah.
We think of marketing as sales promotion, right? And 20% off, and buy this thing now, and disruptive advertisements, but there's a higher meaning in all of this, and it's, do I love you, and do I care about you, and do you care about me, and do I believe that? And that you manufacture and you make and you shape if you have skilled magicians in your hands.
That's awesome. It's an awesome concept. Awesome what you've done, and to see the evolution of the company. We're going to come to a commercial break. We're going to wrap this up in the next segment, so don't go away. You want to hear the rest of the story. If you're listening to this, do follow us on Facebook. About Money is on Facebook. You can follow the Twitters. We tweet during many of the shows, and we tweet during the week. You can check my blog on the website. That has insights into what's going on. So you're listening to Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts. Don't go away, because we're going to be right back after this commercial.
Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
About Money continues. Remember the website adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I'm here talking with Bill Fritsch, and we've been talking about what's happened up to this point. But I think there's some things that are evolving right now that are really applicable. So let's talk about media and own media for a while.
You bet. Own media. Well, a lot of us think about paid media, and that's the way marketing departments work and organizations function, which is we create things, we push them out there, and we hope people buy our products. And just huge industry. And of course, we know all about it because we create commercials, but we actually don't play very much in that space, if at all. What we've tried to do, like we did with the main title business, which was think differently about how you use your assets. And it transformed the television industry. Well, the same thing is happening for corporations right now, where we have a thing called owned media, and we think of owned media as things that we can control ourselves. Our websites, emails, blogs, things that we create content, we push it out there, and we all talk about content, right? Content. And content isn't created equal. But what a lot of corporations, just for whatever reason, don't do is imagine all the assets that they have, that they own. So for example, a building. A building is an asset, and used under the right circumstances, it can actually help to shape your brand and change your customers' perceptions. And probably the best example I have of that is a project our team did. This was just before I came to Digital Kitchen, but we were asked to help design the Cosmopolitan Hotel down in Las Vegas. And the Cosmopolitan Hotel, for those who haven't been there, was a fairly small property. It positioned in a way that was very hard as a small hotel. And they really wanted to do something that differentiated it. They also had the world's smallest marketing budget. But we literally encrusted the entire hotel inside and out with hundreds of video screens. And then we created things to put on those video screens. Now, a lot of people talk about experiential design. I think this project defined what it was. And we took these digital magicians from our Hollywood experience, and we said, what would happen if we created these really amazing, deeply engaging experiences? And literally the entire motif of the hotel could change in a moment. So you can almost play it by day parts, like a television show, right? And you can change the ambience. At one moment, the entire hotel looks like a library. At the next moment, it's just this amazing visual design. And so the team at Digital Kitchen created this. We ended up, a couple things happened. One was, it was the most successful hotel launch in Las Vegas history, with probably the city's smallest marketing budget. And the reason is, people who came, the whole experience was designed around a particular audience. And the hotel, because its environment changes just simply by hitting a button, it was always refreshed. And so people who came had a visual delight of an experience and a deeply emotional experience in terms of the kind of things that were created coming out of this magic. And when they went home, they told their friends about it. And so the hotel had the highest repeat rate of guests and the highest referral rates, the highest room rates, the highest utilization of the restaurants. So very, very successful. And fast forwarding, the whole project won the Grand Prix at Cannes for best design in the world. And the Cannes judges said that the Cosmopolitan has created the first public publishing space in history.
Publishing.
Yeah, and we're publishing emotion and content. And we think of marketing as send stuff out, tell them about the discounts, get them here tomorrow, push them, push them, push them. But there's a whole other side of this thing, and a question I ask a lot of CEOs. And if you just, we turn, and chief marketing officers, right? If we just turn our thinking a little bit, just a dash, and if we weren't so busy pursuing markets, but we thought instead what we're trying to attract our audiences, what would change about what we do? And I think the Cosmopolitan is a great example of it because it was such an engaging experience. Word of mouth just went worldwide, and it sustained for years. And the same thing about this idea of what happens if we think differently about attracting audience. It means our marketing, maybe, if you design things that are so deeply emotional that friends hand to friends, hand to friends, hand to friends, and it goes across the world, and people come voluntarily, you are expanding the people who consider your company and your products. Where a lot of target marketing, which has been the rage of the last 20 years because it seems efficient, it's a reductive process where every year I'm targeting narrower and narrower, and I'm actually losing audience. I'm losing market share. Mm-hmm. So we think that premise of Cosmopolitan, what it did and how word of mouth expanded its business base from its core audience, is a premise for a lot of companies.
And that's what you like to do. So for the listeners who are listening, if they'd like to contact you, how would they do that?
We have a website, www.thisisdk, as in digital kitchen, thisisdk.com. And you can see some things. Now that website's soon going to change because we're now part of an innovation company that we recently sold to and are partnering with. So stay tuned on it as well because we have a lot of exciting stuff coming up.
Well, you've had so many exciting things happening and going on and so innovative. And it seems like you're breaking new ground and way ahead of the curve.
Well, thank you. We try. It is fun. It's a bookend to my career of starting at Walt Disney and launching Disney's home video business and the Disney Channel. And now creating new channels for corporations where we actually create TV shows for companies to attract audience to their to the web, where they can be the only market around there. So it's a blast.
Awesome. Thanks for being on the program.
Mike, thank you.
I want to shift now and talk about what's going on in these markets. Jason Zweig, who's a columnist for the Wall Street Journal, has written a book called The Devil's Financial Dictionary. Now, he patterned it after another book called The Devil's Dictionary, which had nothing to do with financial things, but he patterned it after that. So he takes a number of terms that you hear in every day if you listen to CNBC or you read the Journal or you read marketing materials on what's going on the stock market. These are terms that are used. And I picked up one I thought really appropriate today. He called, and I'm quoting Zweig when I do this, a market strategist. That's a noun. And what he describes is a direct, and I'm quoting, a direct intellectual descendant of the ancient Roman official known as the haruspic, who was practiced in the Etruscan art of divining the future by inspecting the livers of sacrificial sheep and chickens. The typical market strategist uses methods similar to those of the haruspic, but less accurate. However, the modern market strategist has a much higher social status and earns vastly greater income than a haruspic, even adjusting for more than 2,000 years of inflation. Yesterday, actually the day before yesterday, I heard a market strategist speak, Jack Eblum. And he's a macroeconomist, and he's looking at what's going on in the market as many macroeconomists I had a chance to sit down with a professor from my former university where I got my MBA at Carnegie Mellon, Professor Goodfriend, also a macroeconomist. They're building these mathematical models that look backwards at what has happened and try to use the backward-looking thing to forecast going forward. And the whole thing reminds me of an experience. My first professional job was with Pacific Gas and Electric, a long time ago. But I was in their operations research department, and it was a fairly new concept for them, operations research. And forecasting electrical consumption for an electrical utility is really, really crucial. If you are late in building facilities, you end up with brownouts. And if you're early, you end up with borrowing a lot of money without any revenues coming in. So forecasting electrical consumption is one of the key things that you do in an electrical utility. And it's really important for your financial well-being to forecast well and correctly. So that was the function of the operations research. And we were new at that time. We were using moving averages. We were smoothing 20-day, 50-day, 100-day averages. But one of the projects was linear regression. Now you hear people talk all about assets being correlated to this and that. That's regression analysis. And if you're looking at two variables, you look at an X and a Y variable. And if you're following this, there'll be a math test at the end. But anyway, you're looking at two variables and you're trying to draw a line and figure out the relationship between those two variables. And since this was also new, we were tossing every variable we could think of into the pot. Everything we could find data on, we were throwing into a bucket, running a regression analysis, throwing something else in, running a regression analysis, throwing something else, running a regression analysis. And we came out with one variable which had a correlation as close to 1, which is perfection in correlation, but it was like a 97 or 98% correlation coefficient. It was 98%. So if that variable increased, you could count on electrical consumption increasing. Now that's looking backwards at what had happened. But you use this variable and you forecast what's going to happen. Now, do you know what that variable was? I'm going to tell you right after the commercial break. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this commercial break.
More About Money coming up with Mike Adams on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Lots of people manage investment portfolios. Just a few can manage a successful portfolio and provide exceedingly great service to their clients. Here's Mike Adams from Adams Financial Concepts.
We believe the price you pay should be based on the performance of your portfolio and the quality of service you receive.
You know, Mike, it seems that a lot of companies subscribe to the one-size-fits-all mentality of investing. Does one size really fit all?
Not with us. Every portfolio that we manage is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. We place our client's interests first in all portfolio decisions.
If you're looking for a home for your 7-figure plus investment portfolio, call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts, specializing in creating and maintaining wealth for over 20 years. 206-903-1019. That's 206-903-1019. Or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
We're back with more About Money. For details on what you hear on today's show, visit adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Now, here again is Mike Adams.
So as I left off, I can remember as a child going to movies, and every Saturday we went to a movie and they'd have a cereal, so they would get you to come back week after week. So as we left off, I asked the question, what was the variable we found that was the greatest predictor of electrical consumption in Northern California, that had been the best predictor of electrical consumption, and could it be used going forward? What was that variable? You know what it was? The number of prisoners on Alcatraz. Had nothing to do with electrical consumption. It just happened to be that as the number of prisoners increased on Alcatraz, electrical consumption increased. Had nothing to do. And today, if that was really true, if that was a real predictor of electrical consumption in Northern California, they wouldn't be consuming any electricity at all. I came away from that experience realizing there has to be a causal effect. It's not a matter of taking huge amounts of data, and we didn't have anywhere near the data then that they have today. It's not a matter of taking data and running data and throwing it into this funnel and funneling it all down until you have a series that tracks and shows this is where things are going. And so when you get into an economy like we have today, where oil prices are down, where commodity prices are down, normally when that happens, that normally means that the world is in a recession or depression. You know, that if you take and do a regression analysis, I would bet the regression analysis will show you 90% of the time, or 95% correlation coefficient, that every time that's happened, we've had a recession. But this time is different. And I always say, you really get into trouble when you say this time is different. But in this time, this truly is a different time. Because back in the 90s and into the 2000s, you began to have speculation in commodity contracts. You had commodity hedge funds. You had commodity mutual funds. You had financial advisors telling people you need a new asset in your financial plan. And that asset is commodities, because it included gold, it included oil, it included steel and aluminum. You had a big buildup in the demand for commodities and commodity assets. And at the time, remember a few years ago, in like about 2008, 2007, sometime in that time frame when oil prices got to $157 a barrel, the estimates, and nobody kept track of how many derivative contracts were out there, but the estimates were over 50% of the forward contracts were for people who were speculating strictly on price, who had no intention ever of taking possession of the oil. So what were those contracts? Those are the contracts you would enter into an agreement with an oil company or a driller and say, you know, I would like to buy your oil at a 5% premium to today's price, or a 3% premium, or 10% premium. Gold miners, the gold mining companies used to sell their production out a year or 2 years at a slightly higher price. And that gave them money in which to continue their mine, gave them money. They were borrowing on the future. You know, you think of the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker. That was a traditional kind of thing. You look at the airlines, as oil prices went up, airlines like Southwest and Alaska were doing forward contracts to buy the oil a year or 2 years or 3 years into the future at a slightly higher price than today's price. And when the prices went up more than they were paying for the futures, they made a profit on that. And if you look at Southwest and Alaska, a lot of their profits in those mid-aughts were based on speculation in oil price. Well, you got to a point where oil reached $157 a barrel, and there were 10 ships that were floating at sea that I know about, that they were full of oil and they had no takers. Those people that had the contracts for the oil delivery had no way to process the oil, no way to store the oil. They didn't want the oil. They had been simply speculating on the price. So it wasn't happening just with oil. It was happening with steel. It was happening with aluminum. And it gave this illusion that there was a lot of demand for oil, for steel, for aluminum. If you look at what happened, China quadrupled their production capacity for steel between 2000 and 2015. And by the end of 2015, there were 600 million metric tons of excess capacity for producing steel. They're closing mills in Scotland. They're closing steel mills other places because there's an excess capacity. I started my career at Intalco Aluminum up in Ferndale, second largest smelter in the world at the time I started there. And Alcoa, less than a decade ago, bought the facility, and they announced at the end of last year they were shutting down the pot lines, the production furnaces, and they were going to keep the cast house open because there's a 23% excess capacity of aluminum. 23% excess production capacity in the world. And it's cheaper for them to buy it somewhere else and ship it in than it is to produce. And they'll keep the cast house because they'll buy the ingots, melt the ingots, and cast them into products. But it's cheaper for them to do that than to produce it in Ferndale. Excess capacity. We're living, as I mentioned, in kind of a Walmart world where, when Walmart goes into a new place, they undercut everybody's price to win market share. That's where we are today. You're finding China devaluing their currency, other countries devaluing. They're trying to win and keep producing product to put into the U.S. That has not happened before. It has not been something. So when you have the soothsayers, the market strategists looking at their massive data from the past and trying to predict the future, they're looking at the number of prisoners on Alcatraz and thinking that's the best production for electrical consumption. No. When you have oil that's dropping down and the price dropping down, it's not a matter that demand's gone away. It's a matter that there's an oversupply. China, even though there's a lot of talk about China slowing down, China is still growing at 6 or 7%. It's not the double-digit percentage. It's a slowing percentage, but it's still a growth. It's still growing. And in the fourth quarter, China took more imported oil than they had any other quarter previously. So it's not demand is going down. It's a matter that there's an oversupply. And that impacted the stock market, by the way, because what happens to those oil-producing countries? What do they have to do when they're losing money? You have to get money somewhere. And why not sell your stocks and bonds that you hold in America? And that's part of what's happening at the beginning of the year. The forecast is that Russia will run out of money by the end of this year. Saudi Arabia's and central banks are deleting their capital. We'll talk more about that next week when I come back. You gotta wait on. I'll be back next Friday. Have a very good weekend and a very good week. And we'll have more to say next week.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you want Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on AdamsFinancialConcepts.com. That's AdamsFinancialConcepts.com. The information shared on the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Friday afternoon at 3 for more About Money with Mike Adams, here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL.
The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The following program sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.